Hello everyone, my name is Maciej Nowak and welcome to the Osom to Know podcast where we discuss all things WordPress. My today's guest is Amanda Mace, who is a Vice President of Australasia at a company called AbleDocs. I was really looking forward to our conversation with Amanda because she is an expert on accessibility. And thanks to this conversation, something in me just clicked and I started to understand the real benefits of thinking in terms of accessibility problems. I learned a ton today, and I bet you will too. So, without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Amanda Mace.
Hey everyone, it's good to have you here. We're glad you decided to tune in for this episode of the Awesome to Know podcast.
Hello, Amanda. Great to have you on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. We had some troubles with hardware on my side, so thank you very much for your patience. Our today topic will be accessibility, and I would like, to discuss this with you because you are an expert on accessibility. You have a ton of experience, and I guess our listeners would benefit from this conversation in terms of, what does it mean to have accessible website, but also what the accessibility is all about. So, because I think this is a little bit vague term, not so popular. So I would like to understand, from the expert, what is the accessibility in broad terms?
So in broad terms, what I do is I do training and consulting and things like that around ensuring that digital products. So I'm even going to go beyond websites when I talk about this. So digital products, so mobile apps, websites, PDF documents, even PowerPoints, that all of those digital products are accessible for people with disabilities. So it's essentially the digital equivalent of a wheelchair ramp.
All right. So it's not only websites, because, me coming from website world, I tend to think about accessibility in terms of the website. So it's also PDF. So I wonder, how are you implementing, accessibility, rules, or exactly what should we talk about when making, for example, PDFs accessible? So how does it manifest itself?
Yes, so there are lots of different things to take into account. One is that we actually have a standard. So we actually have two standards that are really important. So for PDFs, we're looking specifically for that format. We're looking at PDF UA, which is PDF Universal Accessibility. Very clever title, PDF UA. And PDF UA is a technical specification. It's a standard for what I suppose, for lack of a better term, the back end of the format looks like to make it accessible for particularly assistive technologies that are accessing the content. And so in order to have an accessible PDF, it needs to be done to the PDF UA standard. Interestingly enough, design isn't part of PDF UA. And when we talk about design, so color contrast and images and those sorts of things, the thing that we're looking to is actually WCAG, or the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which are much more well known, to be frank. Lots of people have heard of WCAG, or they've heard of the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which I will call WCAG because no one wants to hear me say Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 100 times in a row.
All right.
But lots of people have heard of WCAG, at least sort of, kind of. But lots of people don't understand WCAG or the scope of it. And when we talk about digital documents, there's actually a part of WCAG there that sits in terms of advice from a design point of view. And certainly for web applications, websites, and mobile apps, WCAG comes into account.
All right. And so, for example, let's switch back to the websites. So, because from my experience, when we have contact with accessibility with our clients, for example, it means that we are talking with a big account, big client, big website. A lot of people will use it, and there's not many other occasions when the accessibility topic is brought, to the discussion. So why is it like accessibility is most of the time discussed in big banks, insurers, or very big websites, or sectors that are regulated and has to implement accessibility rules?
So there are a couple of, I guess, points to make here. One is that where there are rules and laws, of course, that's going to be easier to quote unquote sell accessibility to. They're going to require it in order to sign off on some association or for the government to sign off on what they're doing. So there's that aspect of it. And that's sort of the legal aspect, which is really particularly strong in places like North America. So the United States has an enormous amount of litigation around this sort of area, and you're at risk if you don't do accessibility well. But countries like where I'm from in Australia, where there's less litigation around it. So it exists. It sort of exists in the law, but it's not, it's just not quite as litigious as, say, America is. The push for accessibility is a little bit different. It has to come from a different place. You're having a different type of conversation. Interestingly enough, I think the other reason we don't have this conversation as often as we should in a broader sense and only with those big regulatory bodies or big organizations is because I don't think that us as an accessibility industry have done a good enough job educating. Accessibility has a massive scope. So when we talk about making products accessible, digital products accessible for people with disabilities, oftentimes people immediately go, we have to make it accessible for someone who is blind. And they don't really think beyond that. So the first thing that happens is someone goes, well, we don't have any blind customers. Now, of course, that's probably not true. But also that assumption, while dangerous, is also only accounting for a very small part of accessibility and disability. And so one of the things that we need to do better as an industry is education around the on-flow effects of doing accessibility really well. And that can be things like a few years ago, Microsoft actually did a great job of illustrating this. So they have something called the Microsoft Inclusive Design Toolkit. This is a great toolkit. It's absolutely free. I really highly recommend it. And one of the catchphrases out of that toolkit was solve for one, extend to many. Meaning if you found a solution for a person with one arm, you also found a solution for a person with a broken arm or a parent holding a child. Or in, my case, my 8-year-old who is heavy, by the way. I'm going to have the same barriers in my way as a person with one arm. And if there's a solution for that, well, then all of those people benefit. It's not just about the 1 in 5 statistic of people with a disability. And the other thing that I think we need to do a better job, and this is an industry problem, we need to educate and people need to be able to take it on, is that it's such a broad scope that it can be overwhelming. Right? So it covers so many things. So we could tackle accessible videos in this podcast. This would be a whole podcast on its own, right? There's so much, and that's just one tiny little area. So the other thing is that we have to make it bite-sized. And I think as an industry, we get so passionate. All of the other accessibility professionals I know are really passionate about what we do. We're very lucky to work in a space that we love, and unfortunately also means that we get a little too excited, and that scares people. And it has to be baby steps. It has to be an acknowledgement that this is a journey. We can do a little bit better. We can take a baby step and be that little bit better, draw a line in the sand somewhere and go, we're going to be better tomorrow than we were today, and not worry about being perfect, which I think is, from our point of view as a accessibility professional, where we need to do a little bit better so that there's a better feel about accessibility as a whole.
And I'm curious why people would get stressed by your enthusiasm. So it's like, I think this is a good thing. And it's like, your enthusiasm or the expert's enthusiasm would mean for the client or for the person that is the owner of the website that it's so much to do because he or she is seeing such enthusiastic person on the other end. Yeah,
I think, look, I'm one of those people who is super excited about what I do. And I come across probably as pretty highly energetic. But when you start breaking down the details of what's in WCAG, for example, it's a technical specification. And, if you want to fall asleep, you can read it, but it's not particularly exciting. And you don't necessarily need to know all of the details, but you need to know someone who does. And then once we break down those details, it's quite intricate. So it's not just about finding, alt text for images. It's which images need alt text. What are the solutions for ones that are just decorative? What those solutions look like in different technologies. What is a decorative image over an informative image? And then when we break down, so currently in WCAG, we're at version 2.1. 2.2 is coming, but 2.1 is the current recommendation. In that version, there are 78 criteria. 78.
Wow.
That's a lot of criteria, a lot of breaking down of potential things that could pass or fail in a standard. And that's not even taking into account PDF UA, which has its own sort of syntax to it. So it can be a little bit overwhelming. I think people get really excited about accessibility initially, and then they look at the standard and they go, ooh, that's complicated. And they get a little bit scared.
Yeah, and all of those 70-something rules are as important. So every rule is as important as the other rule, or are there rules that are, the lowest hanging fruits? So for example, I have a website and I want to start implementing accessibility for my website. Let's stick to the website because this is where I where I'm comfortable. So what would be the first step that wouldn't require a ton of work, but would make my website more accessible, to disabled person, or, not disabled, but with some sort of, disabilities?
Yeah, so there are some good low-hanging fruit. Images are one of them. Providing alt text for images is really important and really simple to do. Literally in the code, it's alt equals quote, description, quote. It's a super simple thing. And if you have something that's just decorative, we give it what we call a null alt. So that's where you have the alt tag, but nothing inside the quotes, right? And what happens then is the assistive technology will just ignore it because it's not informative. It's not providing any information, and it's just decorative, which means a user doesn't have to listen to the description. So if you're a big bank, for example, and you have a image like a hero banner on your home loans page, and it's a couple with their arm around each other and a for sale sign on the sale sign of the house and a little puppy at their feet, that's not really any information. It's sort of drawing the eye. You can make that decorative so a screen reader user doesn't have to listen to it, because it already takes so much longer to listen to a page than it would be to just zero in, oh yes, that's the content I need and this is what I need to read. That's certainly low-hanging fruit. The other low-hanging fruit is using HTML in the way that it's meant to be used. So things like providing heading structure, very important. Using heading structure correctly is one of those really simple things. Understanding the purpose of heading structure it's so simple, and yet it's one of the really quick things that we kind of forget about because everyone's using, you're like, oh, well, I like that font size, so I'm going to use a heading level 3 here, but it's not really heading up any content. It's just the look that you want. Whereas if we're really smart about that sort of thing, we can go, this isn't heading up content. I like that size and that color maybe. I'll use CSS. And then you use CSS to make it look the way you want to. Best practice HTML, which shouldn't be hard. Seems to be harder these days to find it. But best practice HTML is always going to give you a more accessible product. Always.
Okay. And you are also highly active in W3C. So you are evangelist there. And I wonder, what do you do there? So how does work or function of an evangelist look like?
Yeah, so I kind of have, I wear 3 hats at W3C. So the World Wide Web Consortium, which is what W3C stands for, they're the people who it's the member body organization who make the standards for lots of different things on web technologies, including accessibility guidelines. So I sit in 3 working groups that are related to accessibility. One of them being the one that makes the guidelines. So I sit in that working group and I get to contribute to making the next version of the next standard. I sit in the education and outreach working group, which means I get to contribute to how we break down those accessibility guidelines and provide information to the general public. So that's I really enjoy working in that group as well. And there's another one that I've actually just joined, the APA working group. And that's also, I'm actually particularly excited about some of the work they're doing around digital accessibility maturity models, which will be...
Okay, and what is this? Because this sounds very exotic to me right now.
So a maturity model is basically it's like a scale. So the idea is to go, as an organization, how are we doing for digital accessibility? Where are we? Where do we want to be? And how do we get there? So it's taking the temperature of an organization. So on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being know nothing, do nothing, 5 being embedded processes of accessibility across the organization. Are we a 1? Are we a 3? And if we're a 3, how do we become a 4? Right? So it's a way of assessing where an organization stands from an accessibility point of view. And the work that we're doing in that working group is just really exciting. I've only just started dipping my feet into that work, but I'm really excited about what's going to come from it. The wonderful thing, I guess, about working at W3C and being part of the working groups, and like I said, I have a few hats on. So I'm chapter manager for Australia, the Western region, which means basically I try to keep the other members in the W3C who are Australian based, connected and feeling part of W3C, put on events that are relevant to Australia for W3C. I have my AC hat, my advisory council hat, which means I vote on behalf of my company, on behalf of AbleDocs for standards as they are nominated. I review them. I get feedback from the company and employees, and then I vote as a representative of AbleDocs. And then I have my evangelist hat, which is really just spreading the word about what W3C does, which is create and collaborate to create new standards for the web.
All right. So it's you're really like literally immersed inside all of the accessibility like initiatives, because it's not only like doing work, right? So doing work for the clients, you are also inside the body that regulates the industry for accessibility. So this is amazing, and because I think this is not often a case where I can, for example, talk with a person that is expert in the field, but also takes part in creating the field itself. So this is amazing to hear, and I wonder how did it all started for you? So maybe I would like to go a couple of steps earlier. So how the whole accessibility movement started for you? You started moving towards accessibility.
It's a funny story. I honestly fell into it, which is a weird thing to admit, but I fell into it. So I've been in the industry now 10 years. And initially, I had no tech background. I had worked in a little bit in marketing, mostly in hospitality, like working front desk and managerial roles in hotels. I didn't have any tech knowledge at all. And when I was just incredibly lucky that a very good friend of mine, her mother was doing a PhD about accessibility. So basically her thesis was based on what was happening here in Australia with the National Transition Strategy, where government was moving from paper-based to e-government and hopefully making things accessible. And I was really lucky. Basically, I got an introduction to Dr. Vivian Conway, who is one of my closest friends' mom. And she sat down and said, look, this is what I do. Here's what you would do if you came and worked for me. And I said, I don't know anything about technology. I'm probably not the right person for you. And she said, no. I'll teach you everything you need to know. And as a woman in the tech industry, can I tell you, this does not happen enough. I was so lucky to have another woman in the tech industry take me under her wing. She took me places. She had me help co-author white papers, academic papers, a book chapter. I did a book chapter for a textbook, just travel the world. She took me to conferences, academic conferences, professional conferences, introduced me to everyone she knew. She got me involved in W3C initially. I was just incredibly lucky. I actually can't speak highly enough of Dr. Conway. She was an incredible influence on my career. And as happens, I became very passionate. Her passion definitely rubbed off on me. I became very passionate. And my general rule of thumb has always been never say no. So even if I have to figure it out, never say no. So I've always just said yes. If she said, do you think you can write this? And oh, yes, of course I can. And I may have lost huge amounts of sleep over this, but I would absolutely try and, do my best. And she just guided me the entire way. And as things progressed and she headed towards retirement, I sort of started taking over some of the business side of things a little bit more. And then last year, in July, she retired officially. She sold the company that I'd been working for the last decade to AbleDocs. And AbleDocs, very luckily for me, saw that, I had been doing an okay job and said, look, how about you take on the entire region and not just this office? So lucky for me, I've been able to do that for the last year and a bit.
Great. Amazing. And when I'm hearing this, when I'm listening to you, it reminds me of this model when there is a master and the apprentice, right? Teaching everything he or she knows to the younger person. And, it's like, it's amazing to hear, because this is also not very popular or not very often happening, because you can look for a mentor and luckily you can find it, but it's also for the personal growth totally different story when you can work with someone who will be teaching you and correcting your mistakes on the fly, or pushing you to regions that are not yet comfortable for you as a person, so you can grow very, very quickly.
It honestly, it's been amazing. I can't say enough good things about Dr. Conway. She definitely challenged me. I often said she used to throw me in the deep end and I never sank. So it's my own fault that we kept going the way we did. But you need people like that in your life. And I really do. I aim to be that for my team here. I've got a great team under me. Almost all of them haven't come from tech backgrounds, and I've been able to train them up. There's one in particular I'm thinking of on my team, and she'll know who she is, who I've just brought along on the journey, even if I feel like sometimes I'm dragging her by the hair. I've brought her along on the journey and thrown her in the deep end. And every time, look, she doesn't sink. So I just assume she can take it.
Great. Yeah. So you can now reverse the roles, right? And you know how to do this already, yeah? Because you were in her shoes previously. Great. Yeah. So since we tackled the company you worked, you worked or still working. So what your company do? There are two companies we know already, right? So how is it working, business wise? So what are your clients? What kind of problems are you solving for them? Because one thing is how to implement something, but the other how to approach the whole strategy for a big organization.
Yeah, and that's where I think we do our best work, is when we're sitting with a client who's like, I have a massive organization. Where do we start? And it depends on the client where you start. I always say that we have to draw a line in the sand somewhere. And it's always about, let's do a little bit better tomorrow. So we work with lots of different types of clients. AbleDocs as a whole we're really lucky. We've got expertise in sort of every area of digital accessibility. But the team here in Australia really focuses on web in particular and mobile apps. So we never just test something and then hand you a report and run. We just don't do that. It's very much a hand-holding exercise. We have banks as clients. We have government agencies as clients. We have small little local councils as clients as well. Not-for-profits who are trying to do the right thing. It's really diverse, our clients. And interestingly enough, the approach to all of them is kind of the same. I really believe in relationship building. I don't want to be the person you come to just be audit my stuff and, we hand you the report and you go, tick, we had an audit. We've done what we needed to do. I actually want to hand you the report and walk through what those issues are. We've got some amazing clients who've done amazing work, and it's taken a long time. And that's the thing, is accessibility really is a journey. It doesn't matter how long you spend with a professional, it's always going to be a journey. It's always going to need to be something that you invest in, that you continually upskill in. But I truly believe that if everyone does a little bit within an organization, it's always going to be better. It's not up to the QA testers. It's not up to the developers. It's not up to the content writers. It's actually everybody, the designers. Everyone takes a little bit of that. And then when you need the verification that it's all working the way it should, then you bring in an auditing team like mine, and we audit and confirm that we can give certification or a statement of conformance saying that you conform to the WCAG guidelines. But at the end of the day, it's about everyone doing a little bit.
Okay, and I wonder, how does the report look like? Is it going through all of those 70-something rules, and you comply here and here, and you have to do this and this in order to comply with this rule?
A little bit. So we actually we have two reports that we do. One is in an Excel workbook, and this is because it's the one the devs really like to work with. Developers love a good Excel workbook. I'm sure you'll agree. And that really does have the checkpoints of pass fail for all 78 criteria.
Yeah. So it's easy. Yes or no, right?
Yeah, exactly. Here's the problem. No, here's the problem. Here's a solution. We always provide general remediation advice in our reports. So we have that, the detailed one. And then we have sort of a high level, what you put on your boss's desk, because they're not going to read an Excel spreadsheet. So we do have a high level sort of PDF type report as well. But the detail of how you solve something can be different for different people. For different clients, it can be, as you know, there are certain things where maybe you don't have access to that particular code. Maybe that widget is completely locked down, or that framework you're using, it's not your fault. You can't change it. There's all sorts of different things. Maybe you can't use semantic HTML, but you can apply ARIA and you can make it work with an ARIA label. So there are different potential solutions for different things. So what we like to do is we'll always give in our reports some generalized advice. Here's how to fix this. And it may be, this image needs an alternative. There are 100 ways to give an image an alternative. It's not just alt text. I mean, the alt tag is probably the easiest way, but that's not the only way to do it. So what we'll do is we'll give you generalized advice in the report, and then we'll say, for the next 6 months, we're on hand. You solve it, and we'll check it for you and make sure it works. We'll be there when you have a question for you. So we kind of give basically 6 months of consultation after we do testing to say, we're here to help you fix this, because that's what we really want. I think the wonderful thing about the industry I work in is we're all just trying to make the world a more accessible place. I did not, and I am not in this industry to get rich, heaven knows. So I only have some options here, and that's to make the world a little bit better and a little bit more accessible in my tiny little way. And my tiny way of doing that is hopping on a call sometimes at, 4:00 in the morning, my time, because they're an American-based client and I'm here in Australia, and going, look, actually, the best way to provide an alternative for that map, here are 3 ways. Which way works for you? Let's talk about this. Let's talk about how we can best make that happen. We've had some really interesting challenges too. I know that before we recorded the podcast, I told you a story about a particular challenge that we had with color.
Yes. I'm waiting to ask this question.
Go ahead and ask the question, and I'll tell you all about it.
What I'm trying to ask is, do you meet like a little bit of a pushback sometimes, or the client that is not really wanting to do something because this is a big challenge for the client, or a big investment, or there is no will, on the other end? It's a broad question, but it's not always like everyone wants to do this, because this is a hassle to implement accessibility, and not everyone is like buying the investment. Let's say sometimes it can be, okay, we have to do this, we don't want to, but we have to, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And we do get pushback. It's one of the first things you learn in the industry is you need to have thick skin, because we do get pushback. A great example of that is around branding. So branding colors, obviously, you pick your branding colors, and big organizations, right? Banks, insurance companies, government, they have their color scheme that they love, and they're absolutely wedded to this color scheme. You can't change this color scheme. And heaven forbid they pick colors which are not accessible. And so we have some guidelines within WCAG about accessible colors, what can be used for text, what not. Even UI components have a color contrast ratio that need to be met. There's all sorts of great calculations and math around color contrast, but they're pretty set. It's a pass or fail standard. And one of my favorite examples of how we deal with pushback is to be really creative. So we had a particular client whose color contrast scheme was just not accessible. And for a really long time, one of the ways to get around that was they actually had two different branding colors. So they had a regular color and a digital version of that color. That way, so their printed documents had a certain color scheme, and we'll say it was light orange or like almost a yellow. And then all of their digital stuff was darker, almost like a burnt color, because the light didn't work. The light coloring on a white background didn't work. And it was really challenging because every time we brought this up, this was a huge problem on the website. So that color was being used everywhere on the white background. It was being used for headings. And it doesn't matter how big you made those headings, it was never going to pass color contrast. It was being used for buttons. It was being used for even like little arrows. Everywhere. It was everywhere. And the challenge was, of course, that it didn't meet color contrast. So they had this printed branding color and the digital branding color, and it wasn't consistent. The branding wasn't consistent. Marketing was very unhappy. The branding people were very unhappy. So, we kind of kept pushing along. In fact, it took years for us to have any sort of impact. And there was a particular day this drove me nuts, I have to admit, because I'm like, this color is just really terrible. You can't see it. It was really, really light. And I'm a massive sport fan. I love sports. I have 7 brothers, so I blame them for me being a sports fan. Yes. I swear my parents had television. I'm a massive sports fan, and this particular organization is a massive sponsor of the stadium here in Australia. And I had gone to the stadium, and I actually cheer for a side that isn't from my hometown. It's from the other side of the country. So when they come to play here, they sit all of the fans in the same spot from the other team. So we're always in the same spot, which of course means that we have the same view of the scoreboard every time. And the sport I'm watching is Australian football. So Aussie rules, Australian rules football. And the scoreboard, as it was at the time, when the sun would go down, the sun would be directly on the scoreboard. And this is a major sponsor. And guess what happens with low contrast when the sun is directly on it? Keeping in mind, I live in Australia where the sun shines,
most of the time.
most of the time. Like I live in Western Australia. It's pretty sunny. So as the sun's going down, The scoreboard is unreadable if there's low contrast. So this particular company, their logo was up on the screen and they had like a big advertisement across the scoreboard and the sun was going down and you couldn't read it. And they're spending millions of dollars to have this advertisement on there. And it wasn't a website thing. It was an advertisement on a scoreboard. And I immediately grabbed my phone, took a picture, and then brought that to my next meeting with branding and marketing. Amazing. And said, this is the problem. And
now you see it. Now you see it.
And you know what? They were like, oh no, that's not good at all. So suddenly what was a website problem became this is a branding problem. Why are we using a really low contrast? And they actually rebranded entirely. So they did as companies do, every sort of 5 to 10 years, depending on the big company, they'll rebrand a bit and give it a fresh look. And when they gave it the fresh look, one of their top priorities was to make sure that they were meeting accessibility color contrast rules. And so what they did was they actually just reversed it. Is they went, instead of having these things on a white background, we like this color. So why don't we put it on a soft black background? And of course, that contrast is now the opposite. And it was incredibly seeable. And now they've rebranded entirely. And now their branding is consistent between the website and all of their printed digital products, their products on the side of buses, the stadium and the scoreboard. Everywhere you see, you have consistent branding and it's all accessible, even if the sun is shining on it.
Yeah, and also two teams don't have to work on different sets of guidelines for the branding. So though this unifying help not only the accessibility but also simplify the work for a couple of teams inside the company. So I think this moment when you grabbed your phone is like one in a million, right? So it was so obvious and the impact was so huge that I wonder how long did it take? How long did it take for them to start the rebranding process once they saw the image? Because I guess it's not not a quick operation.
So yeah, it's not a small thing. It took about 18 months to roll it all out. So, they had to, once the decision was made that they were going to refresh, then it was, they had to engage lots of different stakeholders. So it did take a while to make it happen. And I guess that's one of the reasons I talk about things being a journey when it comes to accessibility. Things the bigger the organization, the slower they move. They tend not to happen overnight. You can't just change a color in branding. You need to have a good reason to change that color. And then you have to decide about all the ways it can be used. And I guess what you're looking for is the opportunity to make that change a really positive one instead of no, we can't do that because that's against our branding. And the truth is that, part of the solution for 5 years was to have a different digital color. Was that a perfect solution? No. Did it work? Yes. Another solution, which they didn't take up, but we've had other clients do, where they didn't want to change their branding. So what they did is they stopped using that color in a way that was informative. So, for example, they didn't use it for text any longer. They only used it where it could be a decorative add-on. So they were using it for little icons, but the text for that icon was underneath. They weren't they weren't using it for informative ways. So you can still have your pretty pink bows if you like, but it's about how you use them. And that's what I always say to people, especially designers. It's hard, when I'm saying I'm being restrictive around color, because it is. It's we're putting restrictions around what color combinations can be used. There's some awesome tools out there, though, that help you find the right color that can work with that white background. Or sometimes it's as simple as, instead of white text on that background, you can use black text on that background. Sometimes it's a really simple fix. Sometimes it's not. But I actually enjoy the challenge of working with a client through those issues, because those are, someone coming to me about alt text, once I teach you about alt text, you can do it yourself. Come to me with the big stuff. Come to me with your branding. Or, how to get Aria to work for drag and drop. Let's talk about the fun stuff.
maybe about maps, because you brought this example previously during our conversation, and I had that moment when, wow, this is a challenge. How do you make, for example, like Google Maps or any other map accessible to the user? So because this is so complicated, so much functionality like dragging, like zooming, moving around elements. I wonder, it must be a challenge for the user. It's so complicated.
It is. And look, it depends. So I can give you 3 examples of 3 clients that we've had that have had 3 different solutions to maps. So one client, what they did was they were literally using the map to pinpoint their location, right? Which is a really common use for a Google map. Hey, here's where we are, right? So their solution to provide an alternative to that map was they actually provided a little link just before the map that said, get directions. And when you selected that link, it went to a page that just had header, footer, and the content. And the content was how to get to them by train, how to get to them via the freeway, how to get to them via the bus. It just provided directions, which is exactly what the map was there for. And it did it in a text version. And so that was one way of solving their problem with Google Maps, is they just provided an alternative. WCAG very rarely says you can't do something, but it will tell you that you need to provide an alternative for something. So that's what they did, is they provided an equal alternative to what the map was there for. So that's
I'm thinking, just to interrupt, so I'm thinking about this in a way that the goal of the user is to get to the company or at least understand where it's located. So it doesn't have to be necessarily a map, a visual representation, but rather a way for the user to imagine a way to get them so that they have a feeling of the distance or the problem or a challenge to get there. So if it's a direct bus, that's easy. But if it is, 7 hops, it's getting complicated. So maybe not this time, right? So but the idea is that you are providing a different way of solving the problem for the user of understanding how to get there.
Exactly. And it's important that we have those visuals. Some people will prefer the visual. It's acknowledging that not everybody can perceive the visual. So we have another client who had a map. It was a really complex map. So they had pins all over the map. It was very interactive, and it was providing emergency warnings so it was a state department providing emergency warnings around fire emergencies and hazards, cyclones, that sort of thing. And what they decided to do was, so in this map, you get to the map, you select one of those icons. It tells you, that has like a little icon. It tells you what the emergency is. So say it's a bushfire warning, it would give you all of the information. You could zoom in, you can zoom out, lots of functionality. You could filter through a list of different types of emergencies. And, it's State Department, so they didn't have a lot of money. So we're like, how do we replicate this and give it a text alternative? And what we did in this case was we actually had them provide a table. So they have a text version only version of this map. And in the table, it has all of the locations listed that have an emergency, the emergency itself, and then where, the information for each of those emergencies. And you could then filter through that map and find the emergency that you were looking for. So it provided all of the information that was available within the map in a non-visual way. And what we actually did was to make sure that that could be found without having to go and tab your way. So a non-visual user won't use a mouse because they can't see. And so they'll tab their way using the keyboard to get to the text-only version. And we didn't want it to be after they had gone through a really inaccessible map. So we actually forced the tab focus as the first item on the page. So they knew right away that there was a text-only version that they could go to, and they could get that same information in a text-only version. And that was a great solution for them. It was a really low-cost solution, but it worked. The last example I have was not a low-cost solution, but it was one that had us nominated for an award. So this is my favorite one, although it wasn't, it was a lot more expensive. It was much more imaginative. So we had a client who wanted to make their Google Maps. So they were a local council with dog parks and that sort of thing that they use their maps for. So lots of different locations, and again, quite complex. And you could open up these different pins and get more information about each of the areas that you had searched for. And they used a combination of Google's APIs, which are there, but not well advertised. So Google's APIs weigh ARIA. So ARIA is a code that speaks, it's within your HTML. It speaks directly to assistive technology and JavaScript. And they basically created a layover for the Google map. So it had buttons that said accessibility on, accessibility off. And you could literally have high contrast or a regular Google map. So when you logged into the page, it would show just like a regular Google map, but had these extra buttons. If you were someone who couldn't use a mouse, so say you had a mobility impairment and you wanted to be able to tab, Google Maps by default doesn't have great keyboard access. We use JavaScript and ARIA to force keyboard access to all of the interactive components, and also forced a really strong indicator for the tab so you could see where your focus was, which also is problematic with Google Maps natively. And basically this layover made what was a really inaccessible, very interactive Google Map very accessible. Using just JavaScript, some clever ARIA, and Google's APIs, which were already available. And that was a great project. We were actually nominated for an award based on the back of that project, along with the local council. And they flew us, two of us, over to Sydney. I think it was Sydney. No, sorry, Melbourne. Over to Melbourne to sit a panel of judges and talk about our project and how we did it. But that was a really exciting one. It took more investment. But it's an example I still use today.
Wow. And I hear this as three totally different approaches to solve similar problems. Of course, you cannot compare, my pin on Google and how to get there versus the interactive map with additional information. But the last solution sounds really not complicated, but like a layer of technology on top of something that is not really accessible and there is no other way around it, because this is the information that is crucial and provided in this map for the visitors. This is amazing, and I wonder what are the tools that maybe there are any tools that users or web builders, developers, or companies can use to judge if they have problems with accessibility, or if they are so, or maybe some things that they can easily identify to fix. So is there any tool that you can use and have a quick grade on your website?
Yeah, absolutely. There are. Look, there are lots of great free tools, even extensions on Chrome that will give you sort of a high level. I will give you the caveat that anytime you're using an automated tool at all, it's not the same as actually testing with the human mind behind it. It can tell you if an image has no alt text. It can't tell you if that image has the right alt text, for example. So that's a really important caveat to mention. Automated tools only get you so far. Look, there are some really good ones. One of my favorites that's really highly visual is Wave by WebAIM, which is, you can get an extension just in Chrome or in Firefox. You can also, you can enter a URL via their website. That's a really simple one. It's a one button press, and it'll give you a load of errors if you have it. Again, not the same as manual testing, but definitely great for high level. We forgot a label for that form input field. Really great for that sort of thing. I also really like the toolkit by the ARC toolkit. Try that again. The ARC toolkit by TPGI, which is another accessibility firm based out of the US. That's a really good one for developers because it delves into the code for you. But some of the basic things that you can do, check color contrast, great tools available for color contrast. Whocanuse.com, fantastic. The color contrast analyzer by Paciello Group, also fantastic. Check keyboard access. So keyboard access is one of those really imperative elements to accessibility, because if someone doesn't have keyboard access, it's a major blocker. This isn't a small thing. This isn't a little bug. It's a full stop. I can't do anything because I can't get to the interactive elements for people who, and not just people who are blind or low vision and can't see to use a mouse, but when we think about how someone with a different assistive technology, because they have a mobility impairment, they use that keyboard as well, or the elements of the keyboard to make it work, to get to the interactive elements. So keyboard testing is really simple. So all you need to do is know that you tab to go to all of the interactive elements, and it should go to each interactive element. You should know where you are all the time, so have a really strong focus indicator. We have a bad habit of thinking about hover focus, but not keyboard focus. We should be thinking about keyboard focus, and we should make sure it can get to everywhere and go in a logical order. So we want it to go where we predict it to go, which in general, at least for most languages like English, for example, or French or Spanish, it would be left to right. Hebrew, Arabic, right to left. But for the most part, left to right, down, left to right, down. So it should be logical. You should be able to predict where the keyboard is going to go next. We tab and enter to submit something or to activate a button or a link. So color contrast, keyboard access, and something like Wave, which will pull up those really high level issues for you, like missing a label for an input field.
That's great. And actually, even though I have no disabilities, I also, for example, with the keyboard access and the predictability of where my tab will take me, sometimes I have problems with this on my phone when I'm filling a form on a web shop of some sort, and I'm just I'm crazy angry. This frustrates me so much because I don't want to type move to another field with my finger, because I have those small keys next, right? Yep. And I press next, and my cursor is somewhere I don't even see my cursor, and I get angry. So I can only imagine the way a disabled person has to be frustrated, because this is daily experience. No matter where such a person goes, that's the challenge. And not only this, when I'm thinking about a huge bank or telecom operator website, I wonder what a huge telecom operator website, what's the experience for a regular disabled customer, where I have a problem to find, renew the contract, or what's the current, offering for a plan. So I'm bringing this up because when you mentioned like the tab access, so the keyboard access, I imagine this huge telecom operators, websites with tons of buttons, and I really cannot imagine what it takes to go through this, because you don't know what's next option, because you have to listen to all of the options before you identify what you want to do, and then okay, maybe I have to reverse to 3 options before. So it's a nightmare.
It really is. And this is where good semantic structure also helps. So when we use headings correctly, a screen reader user, for example, so someone who is blind and relies on a screen reader or a Braille refresh display, which does Braille for you, one of the things that you can do is pull out like a list of headings and navigate via those headings. So what we do visually when we look at a website is we don't read every line of the website, right? You never read everything. You go, you use your visually, you go, oh, this is the heading that has the content I'm under. This is a subheading. That's the information I want. You don't read every line. You just graze until you get what you need. For someone with using assistive technology, particularly like a screen reader, if you call out a list of headings and those headings are actually descriptive and they're heading up content, you can listen to each of the headings and then go directly to the heading that is the content that you want to listen to. So you can actually navigate in a different way, which is why heading structure is so important and probably is underutilized in lots of ways. You can do the same thing with buttons and links, which is why I always recommend don't use click here or read more. The difference between, so if I pull those links out of context. So I just pull them out of the context that they're sitting in. Instead of saying, link, click here to view our privacy statement, and instead said, you can view our privacy statement link, and have the hyperlink be the privacy statement. When they pull up a list of links and they navigate through that list of links, instead of hearing 5 read mores or 5 click here's, they hear privacy statement. This is the difference. It's just thinking a little bit differently about how we do our content.
This is amazing, because I was just to retract about a couple of steps. So the what the disabled person will consume is like a tree of not a sitemap, but like a tree of different titles. I'm thinking about the mega menu. Let's keep this example of a big telecom website. There's a ton of menu entries in many levels of mega menus. And do I get this right, that the menu would be pulled and read to the user, so that the user doesn't have to go to listen to every option, but rather the root of the tree or one of the branches, and then can get deeper and deeper, right? This is the idea.
Absolutely. So if we use heading structure for that, or we use links for that, is you can navigate via links or heading structure and go directly where you need to go. And this is a way of doing exactly what we do, which is glance at the page, find the bit we're after, and just consume the bit we need.
Okay. And I love also the example of click here, because for visual designers, this is natural. You see the prompt, and there's the context, as you said. There's the context of what you are seeing, and you have to just click here, which is also not always the case. This is easy to know what's the CTA, for example. Okay, what's the CTA? Click here. All right, but why? Never mind. But for impaired people, when they have pulled, like you said, 5 click here, it doesn't make sense at all. And this has to change for the designer to formulate the CTA a little bit different. And this is not a huge problem, once you know it.
It's an easy fix. It's an easy fix. And that's the really interesting thing, is that something like that, where you're just being more thoughtful about your link text and what the hyperlink text says, is a really easy fix. And it's one that's really impactful, because the other option, so if you have 5 click here links, what that means is you have to go and read that web page line by line to understand the context of the click here.
And you never know how long the text will be. So it's like a bet. Is it 2 lines or 1 paragraph or 1 page?
Yeah. And you can see how it would be more frustrating, how there could be major blockers in that, why you might shut down a web page and just call instead and hope that someone could help you. And this is where we say, we can talk about return on investment for accessibility, whether it matters or not. This isn't really a money question. It's a human rights question. But at the end of the day, you're going to benefit if people can do things independently. Everyone can do things independently and with less frustration. So the example you gave of tabbing and getting frustrated because it's not going where you think it should go, we've seen that throughout. I've got my mother-in-law has quite a shaky hand, and it's just old age. She doesn't have a particular disability. Just as she's gotten older, her hand shakes a lot. And she's quite tech savvy for, someone in her 60s. And we're all going, listen, I'm not going to give up technology when I'm in my 60s or 70s. So we're all going to be quite tech savvy as we get older, this generation as well. And one of her challenges was she has a laptop, and the trackpad, because of her shaky hand, she can't use it. It's quite a struggle. The mouse is a little bit better, but not perfect. So you know what I taught her to do? To tab and enter, Mum. That's all you need to do. That's what I taught her to do. And it made a huge impact for her. But I do it out of laziness. When I'm filling out a form online, I tab to the next input field. I don't reach over and click them. I can't be bothered. I can't be bothered. I tab to the next input field, and most people do. So it's that idea, again, solve for one, extend to many, right? So Microsoft put this so well when they did that tagline, because it makes sense. If you find a solution For a person with one arm, or in this case, a person who is blind or low vision, you've also found a solution for my mother-in-law with a shaky hand. You've also found a solution for me out of convenience. So, we can actually extend this. And it's a way of looking at accessibility rather than being restrictive as a source of being creative and being innovative, being thoughtful about our designs and about our content. And that's ultimately what I really try to get across with accessibility. It's not that you can't do things, it's that we're more thoughtful about how we do them.
Amazing. I love it. Really. It changes for me how I look at building websites, because I can feel after the discussion with you, I can feel this challenge, because previously it was like the concept I understood, is problematic, but during this conversation, I really felt what it means to build this and what kind of problems this can solve for the users of different, with different impairments. So I really enjoyed this conversation. It's great. I'm testing a couple of questions. So there is a couple of quick questions, yes or no, this or that. If you can answer or you cannot answer, you can explain. If you cannot decide, but I would like to test this test this series of questions. They will be web related. So, but I think it will be great. So, hosting or cloud?
Oh goodness, hosting.
Meetup online or offline?
Offline, but that's a personal preference because
that's great.
I like to be with people.
Yeah, with Zoom too much, this is all understandable.
I just got back from a conference, a W3C conference in Vancouver, and it was so good to hug people again. It was so wonderful.
Exactly. I'm going to every WordCamp conference that I can go to right now. I'm making up for every for those 2 years when we were locked down. All right. Next question: LinkedIn or Twitter?
Twitter.
Podcasts or books?
No, I like books.
Hire freelancers or hire agency?
Freelancers.
Using plugins or avoiding plugins?
Avoiding plugins.
Multi-site or multiple sites?
Multi-site.
Headless or not headless?
Headless?
Yeah, it's a development concept, so if you're not familiar, then that's fine.
No, I'm not. But now I'm curious.
All right. Yeah, I can send a couple of links. It's a way of building website that it is not totally rendered on server, but uses data from the server and render the whole UI on the client computer, so on the browser.
Right. Okay.
Thank you very much for this short round of questions. Is there because we will be wrapping because the time is up slowly. So is there anything you would like to add, as a closing remark or something like this?
I think it's always worthwhile saying that if you do accessibility well, you're going to stand out. There's more awareness around accessibility, particularly in the EU, but this is true across the globe. There's more awareness. And if you invest in accessibility within your agency, within your company, as a person, whether you're a developer or content author or a designer, that's going to be noticed and it's going to put you in good stead, not just for government contracts, but contracts across all industries. People are looking at accessibility. They're looking at it as a corporate social responsibility. They're looking at it as doing the right thing as a human right. So the more you learn, and there are lots of great resources out there, but the more you learn, the better off you'll be.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much for the conversation. I really enjoyed it. And this was really illuminating because even though I'm in the web business, this is not so often brought up. And, and this is the whole movement. I have the feeling. And let's say I just really, really enjoyed this conversation, and it was very illuminating for me.
No, it was fantastic. Thank you so much for asking me to be on and for having me. And yeah, no, it's been wonderful. I'm always happy to chat about accessibility.
Look, pleasure is all mine. Really, I really enjoyed this conversation. Again, I hope our listeners will enjoy this conversation too. And once again, thank you very much, Amanda. And take care.
Thank you.
If you like what you've just heard, don't forget to subscribe for more episodes. On the other hand, if you've got a question we haven't answered yet, feel free to reach out to us directly. Just go to awesomestudio.com/contact. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next episode of the Awesome to Know podcast.